That's a good question. This right behind you is cob. The support walls for the building are all studs. So it's a little bit of trickery. We're trying to make it look like a natural building, but really it's only half natural.
So the lights are cob?
The lights are cob, yeah. And the ceiling is all tongue and groove pine. A lot of people really like the ceiling. The walls all have local clay from, like the same pile that we've been digging from for the cob is also the same pile that we use to make the slip for all these earthen plasters. So there's a more yellowy plaster in the kitchen, and then this is called our crackle plaster. It has a lot of cracks in it, which was intentional. We're still gonna cover it up with some kind of sealant, like an oil or a wax. There's a really foley on the wall. You like it? This orangier plaster has some of the deeper red clay that you've been seeing in the pile. So all three colors came from the same pile of clay, but were from different layers below ground level from the excavation for the foundation.
So the floor is?
The floor right now is just painted plywood or OSB, and it's going to be an adobe floor, but we want to get the addition done first. There's going to be a whole addition on the front of the house, and once we are finished with the addition, which is going to have the same OSB at the same height, then we're going to pour the entire floor all at the same time.
So how thick will the adobe be?
It'll be 1 3/4 inches. So when you go in the kitchen and look at the stove and the fridge, you can see that they're up on platforms. Everything's up on a platform, including all the counters and everything. And so eventually it'll raise up almost 2 inches. And it will have piping going through the adobe layer that will carry heated water. So the floor will be heated up through these radiant heat tubes. And a lot of people like that because, for one, your feet stay nice and toasty during the winter. And also, it's smart because heat rises. So to have heat starting right at the floor makes sense, and then let it rise up to your ceiling.
Can you run cool water in the summer?
You can. I think that's more complicated and more expensive, so I don't think we're going to do that in this case. But I do know that people have radiant heat and radiant cooling. And I'm not sure if it has to have 2 separate sets of pipes or not. It seems like you'd be able to do it the same, but I'm not really sure. There's conventional studs, between which is conventional fiberglass insulation. On top of those studs, we attached metal lath, which is metal that has a flat sheet of metal that has a whole bunch of slits in it and is then pulled apart, probably by a robot or something, to expand it. So there's a lot of little ridges and gaps, which creates it's not a rigid surface. So once you put the lath on and staple it, you can still bend the lath. And then you do a first coat of a scratch coat of plaster, which is just earthen plaster, has no lime in it, and a pretty rough plaster. And we did 1 coat of plaster over everything. And then we did a finished coat of plaster on top of that after it dried.
Oh, yeah.
So once the first coat of plaster dried, you couldn't quite bend it as much. It was a lot stiffer. And then after the second coat, now it's really quite stiff. Although we did have some cracking issues, and we're blaming those on the lath. Well, blaming on ourselves for choosing the lath. But because the lath wasn't a really rigid structure for the plaster to sit on, the plaster can kind of take control over where it wants to go, and when it doesn't have something that it's sitting up against that's really rigid, it'll crack and kind of bend as it will. And if we had put lath up against plywood or something, or up against even you can do plaster right on drywall. So if you plaster right on drywall, the drywall is not going to move at all. So the plaster won't tend to crack as much because it's being forced to stay on that one plane. Plaster is a lime clay. This one is four parts red clay to 1 part sand and 1 part lime and half part straw.
Okay.
I think it's close to that.
So the finely chopped up straw.